listener production.
Hey, Chris Spyrou with you. Welcome to The Briefing. You've probably heard the word woke being thrown around quite a bit lately. It's become a bit of a political hot potato that's incredibly polarising.
There should be no woke ideology in the schools. If you want to do that in university in your linguistics department, that's fine, but leave the children out of it.
It's just not about what's being taught in school. That's just alarmism and I think fear-mongering.
That chat with two experts in opposite corners of the woke ring is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy on Thursday, the 3rd of April.
Good morning, Chris. Good morning, everyone. And I nearly said happy hump day before being pleasantly reminded it is Thursday.
Yeah.
We're just 2 days from the weekend. We're nearly there, team. Now, this morning, the electoral watchdog is reviewing content posted by social media personality and fellow listener stablemate Abby Chatfield. The AEC will be focusing on whether her collaborative posts with the Prime Minister and leader of the Greens, Adam Band, which featured snippets of her chats with them after she invited them onto her podcast, should be classified as political content. And that's important under their rules because some materials are legally required to have an authorisation message at the end.
Authorised by Anthony Albanese, LP Canberra.
Like that. It's worth pointing out that interviews with traditional media sources are excluded from these rules, so it will be interesting to see what happens, Chris, because this will be the first and therefore crucial test for the AEC as more and more politicians are turning to influencers and content creators to try and engage younger voters and spread the message, as we just saw with the budget lockup.
Yeah, it'll be a very interesting one to watch indeed. Hey, sticking with politics very briefly, Peter Dutton, after spending 2 days campaigning in Melbourne, he's in Perth this morning where he's expected to announce a $600 million upgrade to key roads and freight routes that are used by the agriculture, resources and farming industries. He first touched down in Western Australia last night, promising $1 million to a local hospital in Perth's north in a seat firmly held by Labor. Western Australia, Tara, like Victoria, is a key battleground this election, and the opposition is hoping to win back crucial seats that they lost in the 22 election. Whether or not that will happen, given State Labor's convincing win last month, remains to be seen.
And it is Liberation Day, as some of our US counterparts are calling it, with Trump's administration saying,
will go down as one of the most important days in modern American history.
Well, today Trump will hand down sweeping tariffs to economies around the globe, claiming for years that the US has been
ripped off by virtually every country in the world.
We're expecting to see hefty export tariffs for over 20 countries slapped on this morning. And no, Australia is not getting off scot-free, Chris.
Yeah, while we don't know yet for sure which industries will be impacted, we know Trump's had a keen eye on a few of ours, so I'm just going to rattle off the ones that have come through in the last few weeks. He's been keeping an eye on our meat and poultry, streaming services, some of our fruit, the PBS, and the news bargaining agreement, which forces big techs like Facebook and Google to pay for our news content. Now, with Liberation Day, moments away for us, I'm sure once this episode goes live, we're going to be getting updates thick and fast. We in Australia are bracing for tariffs potentially as high as 20% on some of those goods to the US. Trump's likely to go one of two ways with these tariffs, Tara. He'll either apply them country by country, industry by industry, in a you tariff us, we tariff you reciprocal type style, or he could impose a blanket one on most imports to the US.
Yeah, and look, this is the second round of tariffs after obviously the ones he placed on steel, aluminium and cars already in recent weeks. And we're expecting to hear more when he speaks at the White House Rose Garden at 7 a.m. local time or 6 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Now, our PM has come out saying that he won't rule out challenging the tariffs by taking Trump to the World Trade Organization, accusing the US of breaching the free trade agreement agreement. Now, for those that don't know, the World Trade Organization is there essentially to help arbitrate and try and settle these types of disputes between nations. Canada, for example, has already taken the US to the WTO over the last round of tariffs. Now, Albo was actually also spotted dining with Australian golfing legend Greg Norman, who is a very close friend of Trump, with some speculating that it could be to try and enlist his help and get some advice on how to deal with Trump ahead of this announcement this morning, Chris. But meantime, Dutton's come out firing, saying he's ready to take on old Donald.
If I needed to have a fight with Donald Trump or any other world leader to advance our nation's interests, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
Okay, easy words for, someone who's in opposition to say and isn't, the Prime Minister and leader of a country that has to keep the US on side. Yeah,
that's right. And look, Albo's described those comments as aggro, which Dutton then replied saying he just didn't have the strength to stand up to the leader of the free world. So a bit of argy-bargy going on there, Chris, but not unexpected as we continue our election trail.
Changing pace now, prosecutors are planning to appeal the sentence of former New South Wales police officer Christian White, who tasered 95-year-old Claire Noland at an aged care facility in 2023, who later died. White was given a 2-year community corrections order, which the Noland family says is a slap on the wrist. Prosecutors are arguing it's an inadequate sentence after a judge ruled the crime fell on the lower end of the scale, saying White had made a, quote, terrible mistake.
Now, meantime, in Victoria, the state's passed tough new anti-vilification and social cohesion laws in a bid to protect more people from hate speech. They'll see people who commit serious offences like making physical threats or inciting hatred face up to 5 years in prison. Now, these expanded laws, which previously already included race and religion, will now protect people who are targeted based on a disability, gender, sexual identity, or those with a personal association with someone with a protected attribute. The Premier, Jacinta Allen, says it's to make Victoria
a place where you are free from hate, a place where no matter who you love, whoever you pray to, however you identify, you'll be free from hate on our streets. And if there is any hint of that, then police have the powers, and there are strengthened powers to crack down on hate as a crime.
And there was also actually a section included being dubbed the Sam Kerr clause, Chris, to ensure that penalties aren't used against the people that they're actually intended to protect, following the Matildas star's recent trial in the UK.
And in Queensland, police have been given the green light to search people for weapons in all public places without needing a warrant in a move that'll expand the state's wanding powers. Wands are essentially those handheld metal detectors that we kind of see at the airports here and there. This is, of course, in a bid to crack down on knife and other weapon-related crimes in the state. The legislation known as Jack's Law was introduced to Parliament yesterday and aims to make these expanded police powers permanent. The law's named after 17-year-old Jack Beasley, who was stabbed during a night out on the Gold Coast in 2019.
Over to Southeast Asia now, where Myanmar's ruling military has declared a temporary ceasefire in the country's civil war. The surprise announcement is designed to ease recovery efforts following the 7.7 magnitude earthquake that struck on Friday and has killed more than 3,000 people. The halt in fighting between the unelected military government and rebel fighters, which has been going on since 2021, is expected to run for the next 3 weeks, Chris.
It comes as bullets and bombs have continued to be traded in the last few days and almost hours after the army admitted it had opened fire on a convoy of 9 Chinese aid vehicles that were bringing supplies into the region. No one from the Chinese Red Cross was injured, with the army saying they hadn't been notified of the vehicles and sent warning shots after they had failed to stop. Prior to the ceasefire being announced, China had urged both sides to stop fighting and focus on the earthquake recovery. I don't know, Tara, the timing of this is very, very interesting, but despite the politics of it all, it's great that the fighting has stopped and recovery efforts can continue, because this is a country that is already in a dire humanitarian crisis and fighting is not what they need right now.
This train can't depart until the doors are closed.
And some terrifying scenes coming out of Sydney yesterday, with some commuters on the metro left stunned when, unlike that grab, a carriage door wouldn't close but then did stay open for 2 stops despite the driverless train travelling at high speeds. In footage that's now circulated everywhere, 2 train staffers can be seen standing in front of the open doors to keep commuters away, with the Transport Union calling it one of the worst rail safety incidents in decades.
Metro Trains Sydney says the incident was due to a fault they tried to fix remotely, the doors only closing after staff manually shut them. The train was immediately removed from service and the incident is currently being investigated. Tara, I saw this footage. It is, like, you use the right word, it's terrifying. I mean, I don't want to be fear-mongery, but I was like thinking about me and thinking about what I would do in that situation, and I'm just like, whoo. Noise-cancelling headphones in, pretending it doesn't exist, head down.
Yeah, these poor commuters. Look, it was pretty freaky footage, like you said. And look, it kind of just reminds me, just because the fact it's a driverless train, of like this lack of this. We don't have any power when it comes to like robotics and tech. And I'm probably getting futuristic and doomsday here. But yeah, far out. Poor people on the train and yeah, wild footage that's now circulated everywhere across Australia and even dipped into overseas.
Which, Tara Cassidy, is an accidental and perfect segue. Speaking of overseas and Australia, we're diving deep into woke, what it means, why it's being used by people from Donald Trump to Peter Dutton, and how 2 experts feel about the way that the word is weaponized in politics. What do you think of when you hear the word woke? Does your mind go here?
Make no mistake, empathy is not weak or woke. And by the way, woke just means you give a damn about other people.
Or does it go here?
You know what woke means? It means you're a loser. Everything woke turns to shit, okay? It's true.
In a surprise to absolutely no one, wokeism is on the agenda in this first week of election campaigning, with the coalition saying it's brainwashing young Australians and sometimes even making them dumber.
I want young Australians who are going to school to get the best education they can. I don't want them indoctrinated according to the views of the lecturer at university or in relation to the views of the particular teacher. I want our kids to be taught according to community beliefs and standards, and I think that is the expectation of families, not controversial here in the suburbs, and that's exactly what we're after.
But it's not the first nor the last time the opposition leader has declared war on wokeism, which he says is a dying global movement that's alienated the silent majority and a movement that most Australians just no longer care for. So what does woke actually mean, and why is it considered a badge of honour for some, but a slur for others? Joining me now is the director of the Foundations of Western Civilization program at the Institute of Public Affairs, Dr. Bella D'Abrera, and linguist, author and researcher from Griffith University, Dr. Karen Stollznow. Welcome to the briefing to both of you. Woke is increasingly being used as a very dirty word in politics. Dr. Bella, I'll start with you. How do you define woke?
Well, that is a very good question, because everybody has very different definitions of woke, which is why there's this argument raging at the moment. But I would say, look, it has become a lightning rod in politics. So I think one side, I would say the progressive side, see woke as a means to fight oppression. So that would be, think, progressive political causes like race and gender and climate. Whereas the other side, the right side, would see woke as a symbol of sort of virtue signaling and censorship and the cancel culture. I think it depends who you're talking to about the definition, but I would see, as a conservative, I would define woke as another way of saying cancel culture.
Dr. Karen, what about for you?
I do agree that woke is a term that has different meanings and different use for different people, but it's got a very long history as well. It's a slang term. It goes back to African-American English in the 1930s, and it's been used by authors and different people. But how it's typically seen today is to refer to someone who is awake or someone who's aware when it comes to social issues, especially political issues, matters of social justice and oppression, particularly racial and gender equality. But it is certainly a term that has different meanings and uses for different people.
I'm curious to get both of your takes on this. Why do you think we're seeing buzzwords and talking points around wokeism informing the coalition's election campaign? Dr. Bell, I'll start with your thoughts on that.
Why it's coming out now is probably because I think there are more examples coming into the public discussion about what would be perceived as woke. So things that are happening in kindergartens, books that are being encouraged, for children to read. It's more obvious now in the public sphere than it used to be. So I think therefore the discussion is more centered on this idea of woke and woke indoctrination in schools.
Dr. Karen?
The term has predominantly in the past been used by progressive people and more liberal-minded people. And so it's pejorated, which means it's developed negative connotations in use, probably since maybe the 2010s, when it was being used in a positive sense. And it was a hashtag on social media at the time, but became tied in with the Black Lives Matter movement. And so now it's developed these negative connotations for some speakers, and it's been used predominantly as an insult when it's wielded by conservatives, by the right, and it's kind of linked to people who use terms like privilege and fragility and safe spaces, and it has come to mean in some uses someone who thinks that they're right about everything and they're self-righteous. So it's really become a very political term in that sense, and it's been wielded by the right. Here in the United States, it's been used by people like Elon Musk, using phrases like woke mind virus. So it's really been usurped, I think, by the right.
I want to talk about something that you raised there, and that's this idea of it being wielded by the right or by conservative voices. Would you say using it in a political sense actually works, or is this just simply a culture war distraction and very little to do with politics?
I think really it's a social construct. It is being used in a political way, and people use it with different agendas. So it has these opposing uses, and I think at the moment people who tend to use it, I don't think people tend to say, I am woke. I think if someone used it in that way, then they're really not woke in that sense of being aware and awake. And I think it says more about a person who uses it nowadays. It's been really, I think, hijacked, and kind of implies that the person is racist, that they're sexist, that they're intolerant in some way.
Dr. Bella, do you think it is a useful political tool to be having conversations around this, or do you think it's just a little bit of a distraction?
Well, I think it's got very tribal. It's either you're with the woke or you're against the woke. But I don't think it helps in a nuanced and subtle discussion. But it is useful to be able to identify social justice as a way for people who might not be university educated, who might not understand intersectionality. They're not going to know about Kimberly Crenshaw. They're not going to know about all these academics who are behind the social justice movement with critical theory and critical pedagogy. I think in order to have a discussion in public, you need to find a word, and that just happens to be a word at the moment, which is a word that most people have come to understood as representing the left-wing side of politics and progressive causes, race and gender and climate, as I mentioned before. So in that respect, it's useful. In terms of sitting down with your political opponents, obviously, to nut out policies and to nut out what's best for the country, you're not going to start using the word woke in that kind of level of discussion.
Do either of you think that the way that Trump treats wokist policies and wokist ideals helped him get reelected and get himself back into the White House?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, he used the word woke. He's pinpointed what mainstream Americans are upset about, things like very inappropriate discussions about sexuality and gender fluidity in classrooms and in kindergartens. That's happening in America, happening in Australia. So he harnessed that, and this is something that absolutely got him over the line.
Well, yeah, I'd say it wouldn't necessarily be mainstream. I think it's just it's a section of society, and they happen to be the loudest. And when the term's used, it really shuts people down. It minimises discourse. It's not particularly helpful, but it really does state the mindset of a person, says what side of the fence that they're on. But I think that there's a large portion of people who are very unhappy in the United States now, and they're going to become louder and louder. But really, he's just representative of a small group of people who aren't always viewed favourably by other portions and groups, and marginalised groups in particular in the United States.
I'm not sure that it's a small proportion. I mean, he won every seat, he won everything. It's a majority voted for him.
But a lot of people didn't vote this year. Last year, a lot of people didn't turn out to vote.
It was record turnout, and he got the majority vote. So it's not a small minority that is objecting to their children being taught. It's a very basic thing for parents to not want their children, their 3-year-olds, as is happening in Australia, to be taught that there's no such thing as a little boy and a little girl. This is not conservatives being crazy. This is parents wanting to protect their children from a very radical ideology.
And this is people who don't understand science. This is people who don't understand biology. This is a small group of people who are uneducated and uninformed, and they don't understand the issues.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I might hop in here. I am mindful that this is an Australian podcast, and we do at the end of the day want to be talking about Australia. We have these partisan lines in the US, and whether or not it's a majority or a minority that subscribe to it, we can maybe just agree to disagree and leave it at that. But I'm curious to get your takes on this. Where do you think the state of play right now is in Australia? Do you think there is a majority mindset when it comes to not wanting and being, hypercritical of wokeist ideals? Or do you think it is a small and very loud minority who are pushing back against it?
Well, I would like to think it's a minority of people. Like to think it's a loud minority of people because it doesn't reflect well, I think, on Australia. And unfortunately, a lot of things that happen in the United States do trickle down to England and do trickle down to Australia too. So I'm hoping that there'll be some positive change here in the United States and that will be reflected in Australia, but that good will prevail.
Dr. Bell, I'll get your take on that as well.
Yes, so we're talking on completely different sides of the political spectrum. I would see the leftist elite, woke elite, are the loud minority. They've been, they're the ones that will, like the rest of the country, to believe that they're actually the ones who are insane for not understanding that there's only 2 genders. I mean, this is the point that we've arrived at in our country, in Australia, in the US, and the UK, is exactly this, that someone like Karen will think that it's the majority of people are okay with radical gender theory and critical race theory being taught to their children. I would say, and I think that most parents would say, this is not what they want their children to be taught. They want their children to be taught how to read and write. And no matter which way you look at it, literacy and numeracy have been declining because teachers are being prepared to be social justice warriors in schools, at the universities, because that is what education has become. It has become how to be an activist and how to turn children into activists. It is no longer about teaching children how to read and write. Surely we should be focusing on that and not woke ideology in the schools. There should be no woke ideology in the schools. If you want to do that in university in your linguistics department, that's fine, but leave the children out of it.
And I'd say that the matter, just to close, the matter is a lot more complicated than that, and that's really just boiling things down, minimising things. The discussion is much more broad than that, and it's also different to that. So that's just really harping on a particular point, and it's not helpful.
Dr. Karen, I want to unpack that very briefly. There are, as you mentioned, there are layers to this. What are some of the layers that perhaps our listeners right now might not be aware of when it comes to these declining numeracy and literacy rates in Australia?
Well, I think these are very important matters, but I don't think that they're being overshadowed by this issue. This is a social issue. This is really not about having these particular political things being taught in schools. It's not about that at all. It's about people's lives and how people perceive themselves. It's about biology. It's about all these things, and they're really separate to what the doctor is talking about. It's not enforcing this on anyone. This is just about people and who they are and expressing themselves. It's just not about what's being taught in school. That's just alarmism and I think fear-mongering.
I wouldn't say declining literacy and numeracy standards is fear-mongering. I think that's just a basic...
And that's not what I'm saying. We can have both of these things. It's not a matter of one or the other.
Well, see, I disagree. I think you can't have both of these things. I think one has to be compromised. And at the moment, it seems to me, and it seems to everyone, that literacy and numeracy are being compromised for social justice causes in schools. There is a massive prioritization of many of critical theories that have been developed in the universities. They are priorities in the national curriculum. they're there, sustainability and Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures, which to a large extent is decolonization and critical race theory. These are the things being prioritized in the national curriculum. Fine. If you want your children to go to that school where those things are being prioritized, that's up to you. But at the moment, people don't have any choice. They have to follow this national curriculum, and parents are not happy with the fact that their children are not being taught how to read and write properly, which is basic level education.
I think these things can be managed. I think both matters are important. It's not either or.
Well, Dr. Bella and Dr. Karen, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That was Dr. Bella D'Abrera and Dr. Karen Stollznow speaking with me there. Very different takes from both of our experts in that chat, but we want to hear from you. Where do you stand on all of this? And do you think that those who dislike wokeism are in the minority or the majority in Australia? If you're listening to this episode on Spotify, leave us a comment with your thoughts. Or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. And you know what? Why not head to our Instagram at The Briefing Podcast? You can chuck us a DM or leave us a comment on any of our posts. This topic and debate is going absolutely nowhere, and we're very keen to hear from you, especially in the lead up to May the 3rd. That is it for this episode of The Briefing. Don't forget, we'll have another episode in your feeds this afternoon with Tash Belling. And like always, Tara Cassidy and I will be in your feeds tomorrow morning for another dose of headlines and an interesting deep dive. With that said, I'm Chris Spyrou. Thanks for listening, and I will catch you next time.
Listener.